Why don't you tell us what we're looking at?
So you are looking at the West Bank side of the partition wall outside of Bethlehem. Um, so yeah, this was in 2017. So just to give folks a little bit of background, so in May 2017, I went with a an organization. My partner and I went with an organization called the Center for Jewish Nonviolence to the West Bank to do basically solidarity work there, like co-resistance, nonviolent activism in the West Bank. And so basically, what the Center for Jewish Nonviolence is they sort of do this work ongoing. They do delegations every year. So usually it's with partners in the southern part of the West Bank, in the South Hebron Hills, and in Hebron where they have a lot of ties. And it's really to do, they call it this co-resistance. The idea is basically, I think this is an interesting sort of racial framing. The idea of sort of using their Jewish, and I'm not Jewish, by the way. I went on this trip because my close friend was one of the leaders, and because Dan was going, they invited me along, and I thought it sounded like too good of an opportunity to pass up, both because I think that there are lessons to be learned from the situation there. There are parallels in some ways with the situation in the U.S. And because it's just it's a nagging ongoing crisis that's been going on depending on where you want to mark it, going back to 1967, 1948, and it's unresolved. And really, even just like having the time to reflect and put this presentation together, it really just blows my mind how bad the situation was there, even in 2017. And to imagine now how much worse it is, with the marked increase in violence over the last year, and particularly since October 7th, is really mind blowing. So anyway, that was a bit of a tangent, but what CJNV does, apart from the delegations, which you'll get more of a sense for what those are like when I talk about it. But they also do. They send people basically for months at a time to stay with families in the West Bank, because again, there's this concept of using their Jewish American privilege, to help provide security for the Palestinians living there, because the Jewish, forces, that IDF, and the civil administration in the West Bank are just demonstrably less likely to do violent things to Americans or to Western, Jews when they're there, or to do things in front of them. That doesn't always hold up, but not by a long shot. But it does sort of, the concept is that this increased visibility and the presence of these folks, adds a measure of security, a measure of stability that wouldn't otherwise be there. So there's more ongoing visits that people do, and there's visits that they do during the olive harvest in particular, which is a real lifeblood for folks' income in this part of the world, and is also a time when they're really subjected to increased levels of settler violence. So that's sort of the background on what that org was. So I was really privileged, to be one of three non-Jews on this delegation of 130 Jewish people from the U.S., Canada, the U.K., and Belgium, I think, was where they were from. There were also some Israelis who joined us at different points. And yeah, so I mean, we sort of did a few different things. This shot is obviously of the wall, and this is, like I said, in Bethlehem. So starting off the trip, we actually came over. Well, so we're in Tel Aviv, which is this whole other thing that I'm not going to talk about. But basically started the trip as a group in Jerusalem and crossed the the line in the wall into Bethlehem. And just to give you some context, that's no space at all. In a normal world, Bethlehem would be an inner ring suburb of Jerusalem. They're about 5 miles apart. But crossing this wall, so internationals are allowed to. I think Palestinians are only allowed to cross it, through checkpoints, and usually, with a reason if they, are commuting for something like work. Israelis in general are not supposed to come over, but there obviously are many people who live in settlements or who work or go to school in settlements who come over the wall as well. So there is back and forth. What the situation is like literally today, I'm not sure, but because obviously things change pretty rapidly, when there's flare-ups and the violence there, but just to talk a little bit more about what this thing is, for folks who aren't super familiar with it. It basically was put in place after the Second Intifada in 2000. It was really built in the early to mid 2000s, and everything that you see, the whole wall runs through Palestinian territory. It doesn't enter Israel at all. And in fact, it doesn't follow the green line that actually demarcates the border between Israel and Palestine. It cuts into Palestinian territory quite a bit. I have, oh shoot. I don't know if I can get to my notes page, but it basically significantly cuts off certain pieces of the West Bank, and makes it so that Palestinians can't get to them at all, or only with very serious difficulty. So this is actually some of the most arable and productive agricultural land in the West Bank. The parts that have been cut off from the West Bank proper accounted when they were cut off anyway, for about 8% of the agricultural production of the whole West Bank. There's also whole communities that were cut off. There's a whole section of East Jerusalem that's home to about 100,000 people that was completely cut off from the rest of Jerusalem. Those folks continue to pay taxes there, but basically get no social service, no services of any kind. They don't get any planning permission to build anything new. They don't get garbage collection. They don't get easy access to schools or water. So it basically, the situation in these cutoff areas in some cases is really seriously deteriorated. And that was really, even just back in 2017. This is sort of walking around that area. So this is part of the wall. This is a big gate that we were shown. This is some sort of propaganda, I guess, for lack of a better word. I think that is sometimes a negative connotation. I don't use it with one, but basically, people in the area, this is obviously in English for a reason. Someone who's posted this here to explain what their experience has been. So Ada Camp, this is a Palestinian refugee camp in the West Bank near Bethlehem. It's surrounded by the Israeli apartheid walls. Soldiers carry heavy weapons. They enter the houses in the camp, usually in the middle of the night. My brother of 19 was taken away a year ago and is now in a prison in the Negev desert. We do not have the freedom to pray at the Aska Mosque. We need a permit in our own land. My family comes originally from Beit Natif in the Hebron area. In 1948, they were forced to flee. We've had to defend the right to look after our lands occupied by Israel. And this is this is a kind of story that we heard over and over again while we were there. Sort of this really arbitrary use of force on peaceful civilians. The idea being, that the occupation forces there call this making our presence known. And they basically can go into a community for really, or into a home for really no reason other than, for people there to experience the that they are indeed under occupation, and that their life is subject to the whims of the occupying power, the Israeli army and the civil administration in the West Bank.
Grim, very grim.
Yeah. So this is a closer look at that gate. This is a tear gas round that these were just littered around from some protests that had happened in the area. Okay, so now, and this picture sort of moving us right along to Hebron. So basically to give you some background on the way the trip progressed. So we were actually staying in Bethlehem for much of the trip, but we would go. So the group was sort of split up into different parts of the West Bank, and my group was going to this neighborhood in Hebron, which is I think it's the largest. Well, it might be the second largest. It's the largest Palestinian city in the southern West Bank. And it's been a real flashpoint between Palestinians and Israelis for a very long time. So what you're looking at here, this is a grave of someone who killed, I think it was 60. Let me get my numbers straight. I need to look at my.
So yeah, you were looking for some information about that grave. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So Hebron is sort of known for, it's a very important city for both Israelis and for Jews and for Muslims, because of the Cave of the Patriarchs, or the Tomb of the Patriarchs, which is here. And you can see who's in charge of running the show at this point, if that's not totally obvious. So this is the Tomb of the Patriarchs, and this is where Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Rebecca, and Leah from the Bible are supposedly buried. So Hebron's an interesting place because there's a long Jewish history in this city that well predates. I mean, obviously going back, there was Israel, and then but the Jewish presence there, obviously continued, even after most Jews moved or were forced out 2,000 years ago. So the Jewish community in Hebron goes back hundreds of years. There are deep roots there. It basically came to an end following the Hebron massacre in 1929. And between 67 and 69, Jews were killed by Arabs who were incited to violence by rumors that Jews were planning to seize the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. So this was under the British occupation. This was a rumor that was circulating, and there was basically this pogrom that happened against the Jewish community in Hebron. So after that, there are these heroic stories where a lot of the neighbors of these folks actually took them into their homes and secluded them and sheltered lots of the community from the violence that happened during the massacre. But ultimately, this marked the end of the Jewish presence in Hebron, because they were ultimately evacuated by the Brits. So that remained the case until 1968, when a group of Israelis posing as Swiss tourists rented a hotel in Hebron to celebrate Passover and then refused to leave. The government later ordered their evacuation, and they were relocated to the place where this grave is. I thought I had a picture of the actual settlement, but I think it maybe got left out. But yeah, this place called Kiryat Arba. So basically, these aggressive settlers came in, announced that they weren't leaving the city, because they had this attachment and wanted to sort of reestablish a Jewish presence there. The Israeli government said, well, you can't really stay in Hebron, but we'll give you this land right outside Hebron and you can live there. So they set up a settlement there that's been there since that time. In 1979, settlers returned to the old city, a group of women, and squatted in a historic medical clinic there. The government ultimately, and this was in the old city of Hebron, not too far from the Tomb of the Patriarchs. So the government ultimately legitimized their residency there and allowed 50 armed families under military guard to stay in the fortified structure in the heart of the old city. And since that time, there's been numerous acts of violence between these two communities. One of the most egregious ones, in more recent years, this was in 1994. And this was by Baruch Goldstein, whose grave this is. He was a far-right American Israeli who lived in Kiryat Arba. So this is the settlement that's right directly adjacent to Hebron. He killed 29 people in the Tomb of the Patriarchs, Muslim worshippers who were there, and was beaten to death by survivors. So as you can see, his tomb is there. This is a place of honor in the settlement. These rocks are there, are placed, by mourners who are, come to pay their respects to this guy. He's still a vaunted figure, obviously, for many people in the settlement movement, and a lot of people who, continue to make life pretty difficult for a lot of people in this part of the city. So there were riots after the shooting, and then at that stage, the center of Hebron was closed. So the main street, Shahada Street, this area is sort of near where the historic market was. This was really, a vital and busy part of the city. And after 2000, after the Intifada in 2000, it was permanently closed. It was closed in 1994. It was reopened to Palestinians to travel through briefly, and then was closed again after the second Intifada. So there were hundreds of shops that were basically permanently welded shut in the name of security. You can see what that looks like. And so now the place is a ghost town. This was, a crippling blow to the historic city. It's really hard to imagine from these images, but, Hebron is actually, a really lively, noisy, vibrant city. But here in the heart of it, there's really nothing left, because of these actions. And so who is still there? The settlers, who call themselves the Jewish community of Hebron. So it's about 800 people in a city of 200,000, who have taken claim to the historic heart of the city, and who have the right to walk there while the Palestinians don't. You can see here some of the sort of propaganda that they've put up in the area. This is a wall, blocking people from entering the Kasbah, the old city. These stores were closed by the IDF for security reasons after the Arabs began the Oslo War in September 2000, attacking, wounding, and murdering Jews on this road. This is a tribute the settlers put up to some other folks who were also killed, in an attack by a Palestinian on these Jewish settlers. This is an old market building that's been, closed down and taken over by settlers. This is interesting. This sign, I think, does an interesting job of sort of flipping the narrative on its head. After signing the Hebron Accords in 1997, Hebron was divided, leaving Jews with access to 3% of the city. Jews were restricted to only one street, 1 kilometer long. In September 2000, Arabs launched the Oslo War, a terror war against Hebron's Jewish residents and visitors. Following numerous attacks and casualties, these stores were closed by military orders for security reasons. Large, thriving commercial and shopping centers off limits to Jews are open in the Arab part of the city. So, sort of flipping the narrative here to cast themselves as victims, despite having, basically displaced these folks and taken over a large chunk of the city. Um, and when I say taken over, so these residences and homes are closed, but as it was described to us, sort of the pattern in this part of the city is that a little bit at a time the settlers do what they call creating facts on the ground, by going into some of these abandoned buildings, rehabbing them, and suddenly they have a new part of the settlement. And what that can lead to is that as the settlement expands this way, once they have this bridgehead, then there's a need for more security, and so you have to push more of the adjacent people out so that the settlers remain secure. Their priority is always on top. They are subject to Israeli law. Palestinians are subject to military law. Two different judicial systems operating here. So basically, the army can't do anything to stop settler violence, or aren't empowered to, even though the army is mostly who's around. The settlers are only answerable to the police, the Israeli police, and they're not in great terms with them either, as it's been explained to us. But they basically, to a certain degree, get carte blanche in this area, while Palestinians are basically completely forbidden. There's another wall blocking off the Kasbah. And as you can see up there, the little Palestinian flag peeking out from the homes. These people really live sort of cheek by jowl with settlers. This is sort of at the end of one of the paths, and this is the medical clinic I referenced earlier. So this is sort of now sort of historical site all of its own, because it really marks the beginning of the permanent presence of settlers in the heart of Hebron. And as you can see, to get out, you have to go through a gate and a checkpoint in order to go anywhere. This is just sort of more shots of the area around there. It's really beautiful walking through these olive groves, but it's
Yeah,
so this
there is a beauty to it. Did you ever feel any kind of like conflict there?
a little bit. So I mean, so this is a woman who lives there, and she has settlers who live right next door. And this chicken wire is in her garden because settlers throw garbage and rocks at her and her family when they're in their garden. So this is the kind of really intense stuff that, I mean, just I don't know. I meet plenty of people who have problems with their neighbors, and I know, that can take a really, really ugly tone. And it's interesting to imagine, interesting being the softest possible word I could use, what it must be like to just endure that level of just hatred and dehumanization literally at your doorstep, day after day after day. We didn't have any direct confrontations with those people, but as you can see, they did not hesitate to come out and at least look at us. This is one of her neighbors who, was coming out to film what we were doing. The army did come through a couple times as well, but nobody really shook us up, at least at this part. Okay, and then sort of moving on to the next part. So I think I referenced earlier that, what we were really doing here was to take part in a direct action.
Right.
So this is down in the South Hebron Hills proper. This is in a village called At-Tawani. And so this is where we spent one night on this rooftop, and woke up the next morning, and you can see sort of how rural it is there. And this is one of those sort of better equipped villages in the area. I think they have access to running water, and you can see there's some electricity. That's not true in most of the South Hebron Hills or through a lot of Area C. At some point, I'll go back and talk about what that means. No, I should talk about that now. So basically, the situation here is that this is an area C. So there are different areas, and I had a map that I wanted to put up, and it also didn't make it into these slides. But if you want to Google this as I'm talking, the areas that were put in place by the Oslo Accords in the West Bank. So the West Bank is broken up into areas A, B, and C. So where we were before in Hebron is actually its own special place because of the settlement that's happened there. So Hebron is divided into area H1, which is Palestinian controlled, and the little sliver of H2, which is where the settlements are, where Tal Rameda is, and where Shahada Street were, and that's controlled by Israel. Throughout the rest of the West Bank, they're divided into areas A, B, and C. Area A is basically where 80% of the population lives. Those are the Palestinian urban areas. Area B is more rural, and on paper, it's supposed to be jointly controlled between Israel and the Palestinians. And Area C is completely controlled by Israel, the Israeli army and civil administration. So at Tawani, which is pictured here, is in Area C. If you're looking at the map, you can see what the difficulty is that's posed here. Areas A and B are not contiguous. Area C is the only of these areas that is contiguous. So in order to get from one part of Area A to another Area A, you have to cross through Area C, which is under complete Israeli control. It makes and this was supposed to be a temporary measure. This was supposed to last for 5 years after the Oslo Accords were signed in 1993. It's now 2003, and the situation is still in place. And so Israel has full control over Area C, and this is where all of the Israeli settlements are, apart from the ones in Hebron. So, I've talked about these a little bit. I also wanted to have a picture of one of the settlements on here, but basically what they look like at this point, there's about 500,000 Israelis and 300,000 Palestinians who live in Area C. There's I want to say it's like 2 million people or something like that who live in the West Bank total. Area C, as you can see, is very sparse. It's these little villages on the Palestinian side, and then on the Israeli side, it's these settlements that are home to about 500,000 Israelis. So the fact that these settlements keep expanding basically is why people you'll hear people say that they make the possibility of a future Palestinian state seem really unlikely, because they break up any geographical contiguity of the area. They deplete things like water resources. Palestinians in places like this are not on the Israeli water grid. The settlements are. People in places like this are not on the electricity grid. The settlements are. These people, in a lot of cases, they will have their own water collection cisterns or solar panels that are put up. These will often be destroyed because guess what? In Area C, you don't get planning permission unless you're a settler. So you end up with all of this sort of, for lack of a better word, bullshit. This bureaucracy, this sort of phony bureaucracy that gets in place where, oh, you didn't apply for a permit, so now I have to destroy this building. This wasn't permitted, so I'm going to tear down your water cistern that you actually need in order to water your crops so that your cropland doesn't go fallow, so that the Israeli government doesn't then have the right to take your land. So you end up in these catch-22s. It's impossible to live here and be a law-abiding citizen. They've literally made it so full of hardship and contradictions that you can't follow the law and live. Um, so that's the situation these folks are in Atawani. And this is another sort of tool of the way land gets used or sort of foreclosed from development in Area C. As you can see here, we were walking into a firing area. This is a closed military zone, and closed military zone gets thrown around a lot. The civil administration and the army can just sort of unilaterally declare anywhere a closed military zone. So one of the previous delegations, for example, they were on someone's property in Hebron and were trying to, put in place a movie theater. They were like cleaning up a building to try and, make it so that the community could watch movies there. Suddenly it became a closed military zone and everyone had to leave. And so that was what the direct action was in the year before ours. There were arrests at that time, but not arrests of American Jews. And that was sort of what our experience ended up being as well, is that they were not willing to arrest our delegation. This is sort of on the way between. So what we were doing here was we started off here and we walked into this firing zone, this closed military zone, to a place called Sarura, which is a little hamlet of, just a small handful of homes. I would say it's, maybe just a few, maybe 2 or 3 families would have lived there. But this was like a cave dwelling, some cave dwellings, and some abandoned structures that were, abandoned after 1997. And the families had not been allowed to return there because the area had been off limits to them. So our delegation of 130 people walked into this area. You can see here some of the other I say settlements, these are Palestinian homes that we were passing. And this is our delegation. So we got there and, basically assumed that we were going to get arrested. That was sort of the idea, is to do this sort of unprecedented arrestable action in this area, and in trying to sort of retake this land on behalf of these villagers from Atawani. So, and we, one thing I didn't show, we did prepare for that. We had a few days of education and civil disobedience training. We were split into groups of people who were willing to get arrested and people who were not. We're sort of prepared for that, going in. This is, sort of some of the landscape around there. What you see here, this is directly adjacent to where we were in Sarura. Now, can anyone guess why those trees are there? Everything else around here looks like this.
Right. Yeah. It's like a barren wasteland until these trees.
Yeah. So every tree that you see in this part of the West Bank has been planted by settlers. And, you can probably also guess from looking at this where all the water is. So this is sort of feeds into a narrative that you hear about Israel sometimes, that they made the desert bloom. These reforestry projects, and even things like parks or archaeological museums can sort of have this dark tinge to them, because they are, that there was actually one delegation that visited was basically a village that was displaced. So the people who lived there were themselves had already been displaced during the Nakba in 1948. They moved to this area in the South Hebron Hills, and then they were displaced again because the Israeli government wanted to build a museum where their village was, because there was a historic synagogue there. So they still live there in another village that itself is now also a threat of being evicted because they don't have the proper permits to live there. But meanwhile, you have situations like this, the settlement of Hebron, of Maon, which is, home to some pretty notoriously violent settlers. These folks are known for, harassing school children who try to, get to school in Atwani. So one thing that a lot of international delegations have done when they're in this area is to try and walk the children to school, because nobody feels safe doing that because of the harassment they get from settlers. So this was right up against, where we were. So as it turns out, we got there in this live firing closed military zone, and nobody arrested us like we thought they were going to do. So I don't know what happened behind the scenes, but I can only imagine the scramble to actually pull together everything that we needed to actually hold this site. Getting together mats, a tent, food, water, toilets for 130 plus people. But we actually did manage to stay in the site, and we're doing sort of similar work to what we were doing in Hebron, clearing out the caves, leveling the floors. We did some building walls with just the rocks that were around there to try and make it difficult for vehicles to pass, so that settlers couldn't drive in and screw things up. This is what it looks like inside of the cave. So it's actually, fairly traditional in this part of the South Hebron Hills for people to live in caves like this. So this at one point in the past was a home. We were in here sort of trying to restore it to the best of our ability. The civil administration did pay us a visit one night. I think we were there for 2 nights. It's been 6 years now, so for more than 6 years now, so forgive me if I'm a little light on details sometimes, but I believe this was our second night there. It was right after Havdalah, so the end of Shabbat. When basically everybody could go back on duty again, and the first thing they did was come right after dinner and disrupt our group. So they tore down our tent and took our generator away, and sort of roughed some people up, but no arrests still. Which is obviously not the normal lived experience for Palestinians, living in the same area, or even in a lot of cases Israelis. It really is a privilege that's bestowed to international Jews, when they come to that land. I have some video of it, but it was kind of too much to try and get on here. So that, you asked about confrontations. This was really the worst of it that we faced. Let's see. I thought I had some other pictures, but maybe that was the last one I had.
Yeah, I think you went through
Yeah,
all the ones you have there anyway.
yeah. So that was sort of the end of the delegation. And so after that, something happened that none of us could have predicted, which is that people managed to continue holding that site indefinitely. So it's still, I mean, again, I'm not sure what is happening as of today, but until, as recently as this year, there was still activity, and this was still being used as a spot for, sort of international solidarity, and for this sort of, co-resistance work, to continue going on. The delegation actually did something that nobody expected it to, which was to actually successfully, reclaim this land, in the face of, ongoing, settler attacks and violence in the area. So that was my trip. I have some other thoughts as well, sort of about just sort of racial politics in Israel, but I'll
Yeah, it's. I think the first thing that I thought is just how how complicated the history is, and how complicated the governmental actions are for people to understand. Um, I don't think that they're complicated in terms of like your explanation is complicated, but the messages that a lot of people get who don't travel over there and just are getting messages from mainstream news outlets or even independent news outlets, they're not going to hear a lot of the history, I feel like, that you described in background based on the places that you visited. And I also don't think that they would hear of different actions that are being taken to limit resources to Palestinians as much. I mean, obviously, we hear about it now because there's been literally an announcement by the IDF, right, by Netanyahu. But yeah, I don't think that. I just appreciate you sharing that to give us that insight into your experience and what you heard from directly from Palestinian people and through the organization. And it is really cool to see that your organization's work, specifically your delegation, had some continuity. Um, whether that was predicted or not or expected or not, that's great. Um, the longer these relationships can be maintained, I think is a net positive overall. So I wrote here just that harassing children trying to go to school, it's just high level dehumanization, right? And obviously, as a black American, I think of Ruby Bridges, but
Mhm.
there's also several African countries who have experienced similar situations. I mean, up to and including murdering children trying to go to school. And, those stories always really hit me hard because obviously I care about education. I'm a big education advocate, a teacher of almost 2 decades. So it just really, when people just are trying to terrorize people just trying to learn stuff, I don't know, it bothers me.
Yeah.
We got a comment here from Tristan's mom. They specifically targeted homes and apartments where women and children were during the day while their husbands and fathers were working. They knew exactly what they're doing, taking out the women and children so their race dies out. Our government picks and chooses who they want to help and whose business they want to stick their noses in. Yeah, you can see it in a lot of different contexts. You know, I think in the United States, in the law enforcement context, you see it very clearly. Although it's more and more becoming just a free for all on anyone. Again, here.
Yeah.
So yeah. Anyways, your reflections on those comments.
Yeah. I mean, it's incredible to me because I mean, you're right. I mean, it's you literally now in this, what's the word? I mean, during this genocide, or like I said, are having it shown to you on your phone, and then they tell you, "Oh no, that's not what you're seeing," or "No, that was justified because there were terrorists there." And it's and then you have people from the same government who say, you know, remember Amalek, like, we're going to kill every man, woman, and child, like literally from the mouth of the prime minister. Um, you know, people literally calling for Gaza to be wiped off the face of the earth. People literally, calling for Gazans to be pushed into Egypt. It's like, so why are you, what is the point of this bullshit where you tell me that that's not happening and then you go and say it? Like,
I mean, isn't
it's,
isn't Donald Trump the answer to that? Like I mean,
yeah,
he's the one who said, don't look with your eyes or listen with your ears, just listen to me."
yeah,
So I mean, that's a strategy. It's obviously effective. Maybe not
yeah,
for people like you and me who have learned to, decode. I guess is a good way of putting it, propaganda, and so we can at least be aware of what's being pushed towards us and like look deeper, and we have the resources and knowledge to look deeper. But most people don't have any of that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I mean, I hope that what sort of talking about this tonight helps to do is just instill in people that this is definitely a pattern that's been going on for a very long time. The way that sort of language gets used, the way that law gets used, um, it's bullshit. It's amazing just sort of the amount of like the way that the language just sort of gets mangled and stripped of like meaning or truth, in order to deliver like something very straightforward, which is conquest.
Yeah. And we've seen the same tactic being taken with the word woke here. A word that once meant awareness of, the racial hierarchy and its impact on the world around you, and what the possibilities for that impact could be, and making sure that you protect yourself from it by staying woke, right? And now people use it as a pejorative. People use it as like just a negative aspect of your character or your moral philosophy or something. So, yeah, these tactics, while they may be being used in different contexts in different ways, like they're extremely similar and used for the same purpose. What are your reflections on your experience there, all the different nuances, everything that you saw, the dehumanization, and the current conflict, it's rising, what's going on here in your own country, all of it. I'd love to hear anything you'd like to share on your reflections, on what you've experienced and what we're currently experiencing.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think, yeah, it sort of actually gets me back to what we were talking about at the beginning, which is that, what you were saying sort of reminded me of it's not only um just sort of contesting the very reality that we live in, the sort of the alternate facts thing. It's also just sort of um creating alienation between people. I was, thinking about these polls that have come out showing how conservative the younger generation in Israel is becoming. That only 20% of them believe in the possibility or believe that it would be a good thing to have a two-state solution. So that means 80% of young people in Israel don't believe that. They live in a because of that wall that we talked about at the beginning, they have less exposure probably than any Israeli generation in history to actual living, breathing Palestinians. They are extremely concerned with security, and they don't. I mean, it seems pretty clear that they don't see these people as human or think that they matter. And I think to a certain degree that's true of a lot of, probably a lot of Israelis right now. Certainly, I mean, we went through that in the U.S., during the Iraq War and the invasion of Afghanistan. It's really amazing how you can make people into targets in people's mind and make them nothing more than that. But I can understand that. That's an extension of what I was talking about. In answer to your first question about my racial, my lived racial experience. I think that lacking that shared experience, even if you live alongside people, it's really easy to make them into something that they're not in your head or to misunderstand who they are. Um, and it's incredible the way people can be pretty intentional about using that alienation and skilling up physical infrastructure to make sure that it stays that way, to deliver a political agenda.
Yeah, and like you said before, and weaponizing the law to do it as
Hmm.
well. And that's something that we've talked about in the United States in the race context. Obviously keeping us, although we're still a very segregated country, it's very difficult to keep our racial groups separate from each other, as was once done in this country. So now it seems to be, let's make sure that no one gets educated about race and about the history of race and how a racial construct was created and implemented, and the history of that implementation and the consequences of it. Make sure that nobody is able to backtrace that, so that the bigotry that we've become accustomed to in this country, the generations long racial hierarchy and its consequences, can continue. And so, that's my little part, is just to create space for conversations about that history, about that legacy, about what it means to make connections with people on that level. And I think it serves a dual purpose. It makes people, it kind of deprograms people away from dehumanization. Um, because ultimately we are just all humans, right? We're all having the same human experience to a certain degree. And so we can always find commonality between our experiences, despite the great lengths that people have taken to divide us through the generations.
Yeah.
The question is, are we going to put in the effort to do that? Because it is an effort now. It's an effort because our environment doesn't want us to do that. The people in power don't want us to do that, because there's only one place that leads, and that's to a revolutionary type society, a society that recognizes that what we've built is maybe not, maybe we made some mistakes, some missteps, and that is not the narrative that any country wants to tell right now, much less Israel or the United States. You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, no, and they never will.
I don't know. Never say never. Like, I mean,
Well, I mean, I don't think the people who are in charge of any country are interested in that. I think that the people
I
who
mean, I
live in
agree.
it, in
Yeah.
every country would, there are people who see that maybe now more than ever. Everything's just so disorganized right now.
That's true, and I agree with all of that. I just think that the future isn't so certain, like ultimately, you know, there's there's gonna be chaos. Like it's some, I don't know how else to say that, but like the power structure is just, it's, they're trying to cement it, but it's not gonna work. I think that we're too connected. There's too many informed people now. Um, there's too many resources that people are willing to put forward transformative change. And I think that's only going to increase. I do think fear has been used as a weapon to keep people at bay for a long time, and it's still very effective, but I just don't think it's as effective as it once was. And that it's not as easy, despite, I mean, it goes back to what you were saying before. You're like, they're telling us that this isn't happening, even though it's happening before our very eyes. I don't think that's a winning strategy. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I don't know where that's going to lead us. Like obviously at some point the rubber's going to meet the road. I don't know what that'll look like. I don't know, what that conflict will. I literally can't even imagine it. But I do know that that's something that's going to eventually come, because there's now, like I said, too many of us, and who want something better, who want something different, and who believe that such a thing is possible as well. So yeah, I mean, I'm not saying that we're gonna win or anything like that. I'm just saying that I do think that there is reason for hope for the future, despite the what are clearly many sacrifices yet to come. You know?
Yeah. We have to be hopeful. I'm sort of ripping off someone who was I went to a Hanukkah rally at the first night of Hanukkah in Columbus Circle, and this guy said, it was something along the lines of like, we as Jews are not commanded to be optimists. We are, we do have to be hopeful, and I think that's a good distinction. You can look at the facts and still will yourself to have hope because you have to. And I think that's something that the Palestinians, not to make them into this sort of like noble, thing or put them on a pedestal. But I think that what we're learning from watching what's happening over there and what I learned from them in the West Bank, it's like there's no time to lose hope. Like they don't have any choice. Like they have to have hope. It's a survival tool. And it's something we have to will for ourselves.
And I don't think we have any excuse not having bombs being dropped on us. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
I th- I,
Exactly.
I think we can muster it. So we
Sitting
got to
here in my
stay
comfy
hopeful.
apartment, talking to my friend online with my cute little Christmas tree.
Exactly. Like I mean, we're out here chilling, so we gotta always be grateful and remember, as we're seeking change, that we need to be grateful for the situation that we have as well, but also recognize that you know some of these comforts that we have, we may need to sacrifice them, some of them,
Mhm.
and that's a difficult thing. Every individual person is gonna have to think about what that means for them, but like ultimately changing your environment, changing your world, changing your locale, changing your country, it requires sacrifice. That's what it requires.
Mhm.
And I just feel like a lot of people, they overlook that, or they feel like, oh, things, I don't know, like it's either weird acceptance to me. I think acceptance is weird under, you know, under the way the world works right now. I don't know why people would accept the way things work right now if you value humanity, your own and other people's. Um, I would think that you would want a different world, a different country if you're in the United States.